We begin in Edmonton, where Mark Carney has launched his campaign to replace Justin Trudeau as Liberal leader and Prime Minister.
Yes, Canada needs change, but not just any change. We need change that works for people, and we've never needed it more. So if you remember one thing from what I say today, remember this. I am going to be completely focused on getting our economy back on track.
Carney will not go unchallenged in this race. Some current and former cabinet ministers are either about to launch or considering it, as are some current and former MPs. Carney is the only political rookie, but considered an economic warhorse as a former central banker for 2 G7 countries. The CBC's Ashley Burke joins us from Mark Carney's announcement in Edmonton. So Ashley, what was Mark Carney's main message to Canadians and to Liberals?
Well, David, Mark Carney's main job today was to show Liberals that he can wow them, and that this room, which earlier was filled with supporters, that he can command the room, that he can command the cameras, and for those Liberals watching at home, that they can see how he handles situations like this. And you know, he also had to show them and prove to them that he thinks he can have a shot of not just turning the Liberals' fortunes around, which they're facing really dire polling, but that he can actually win the next federal election. And that's something that he said a couple times during his speech, that he believes that he can be the one to win that election. He also had to introduce himself to Canadians. There was this moment during the question and answer where he said to a local reporter, "You went out with my photo today and you showed it to people at my high school. Did they know me?" And the reporter said no, and he was not surprised by that. So he's aware that is a big challenge for him, the name recognition there. He started by saying, "Hi, I'm Mark." He talked about how he chose this location here in Edmonton because it's where, just outside, is the outdoor rink where he learned to skate. And he grew up playing hockey, and he used that to try to connect with Canadians. And as well, we heard a lot of hockey analogies during his speech about winning, about going to third period and scoring. And also his other challenge today was really him trying to position himself as an outsider. He says that he knows he's not, quote, the usual suspect, but that's a challenge for him because he has advised Trudeau before during COVID-19. He's also been an advisor for the party on the economic front more recently. So that's something he's come under attack from the opposition for. And his key message really to not only his supporters and to Liberals and people he's trying to get to come onto his side and vote for him in this Liberal leadership race, but also the public, was that he wants to turn the economy around. And he talked about why he believes he's the best person to do that. He said that the federal government has not been his focus, or has taken the focus off it at times, and he tried to argue that he wouldn't do that.
Right. He's very much positioning himself as a centrist Liberal, more economically focused, and that will be his priorities. And that's his differentiation pitch, versus other candidates. But he also is trying to position himself against the front runner right now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Tell us about what he said there.
Exactly. A lot of this was about trying to differentiate himself against Poilievre and also show that he could potentially take him on. Poilievre is a skilled communicator, a longtime politician, someone that can attack people in the House and publicly, and is very strong at that. And you heard today Carney say that three-word slogans do not solve problems, and he really kind of zeroed in on that. Take a listen to what he said.
These aren't normal times, and part of the reason how we've ended up in these times is because of certain type of politician perfecting their art, which is focused on slogans, slander, sound bites, attacking the institutions at the core of our economies, exploiting vulnerabilities for other ends. And we can't afford that. In my judgment, it's a time to come together and to build as a country. You can't do that when you're insulting more than half of it.
Now, as he made his pitch to the supporters here about why he's the right one to take on Pierre Poilievre, there were more than 100 people that were packed into this room. It's a fairly small room. There was a lot of media, too. And there were also 8 Liberal MPs who were here supporting him. We're now seeing those endorsements start to roll in. And several of those MPs are individuals who, in the past, had either privately or publicly called for the Prime Minister to resign. There's also still a lot of questions we don't have answers to, including a straight-up answer if he will scrap the carbon tax, and as well exactly where he's going to run to become an MP.
Okay, Ashley, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Ashley Burke in Edmonton. Well, any Liberal leadership hopefuls looking to go up against Mark Carney have just 1 week left to declare their intentions, as the cutoff to enter this race is January 23rd. Government House Leader Karina Gould is expected to launch her campaign in her Burlington, Ontario riding this weekend. And a source tells us that former Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland will announce her bid on Sunday in Toronto. That makes 3 major contenders with their share of supporters within the Liberal caucus, and we've got a panel of them joining us today. They've each endorsed one of these 3 candidates. So here with me today is Ontario Liberal MP Pam Damoff. She's supporting Karina Gould. Ontario Liberal MP James Maloney, who is on Team Chrystia Freeland, and Quebec Liberal MP Sophie Chatel, who has endorsed Mark Carney. It's good to see you all. Thank you very much for being here today on what's a busy time for your party. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sophie Chatel, I'd like to start with you. You've endorsed Mark Carney, even though he says your government has lost focus on the economy, it spends too much and it invests too little. What do you make of his critique of the government of which you are a part?
What I heard Mark saying today was really music to my ears. I heard a Liberal voice articulating clearly a vision for Canada and how to unlock Canada's potential in a way that will benefit everybody, a concentration on the key issues that are big challenges of our time, whether it's the green transition, whether it's AI revolution, or whether it's facing Trump. So I think that it was music to my ears. He showed leadership, he showed his experience, which I happen to have witnessed firsthand when I was at the OECD, how he managed the Brexit crisis. It was done with so much skills, negotiation skills, and experience. So I'm very grateful that he's a candidate, and he has my full support.
So James Maloney, you're on Team Freeland in this, and Mark Carney didn't mention her by name, but he said this government spends too much and invests too little, and she's been the one doing the spending and lack of investing, if you extrapolate his message. Is this the line of demarcation between these 2 candidates in this race, do you think?
Everybody's going to be trying to parse words and phrases here, but...
Well, spends too much, invests too little is pretty clear, right?
But he used the hockey analogy more than once. And let's remember, we are all Liberals. We're all on the same team. We're all wearing the same colored jersey. And he's been part of that team just like Karina and Chrystia. And we're all running against Pierre Poilievre. We're not really running against each other. So what he's really talking about is moving forward. And as a Liberal Party, we need to refine our message, which is, it's an evergreen process. We're always working together to try to find ways to improve Canadians' lives. And that's really what he's talking about. I didn't take what he said as an attack on other candidates. I took what he said as, let's work together and go after Pierre Poilievre so that we don't see him ending up as Prime Minister.
But how do you think on the Sunday launch, or if that is when, in fact, Chrystia Freeland does go public, how do you think she sort of responds to that? Because it's put out there now with the suggestion that there are economic weaknesses in the country and the government spending and priorities weren't there. And the Prime Minister is the boss, so it's also a suggestion on what he's done. What does she say as the former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, do you think, to respond to that?
Well, the obvious answer is we'll have to wait till Sunday to see what she says.
Okay.
You're telling me it's Sunday. Your information is usually better than mine. But look, I will say it again, David. The point is we're all on the same team here. We're all facing the same issues. And we've all been part of this discussion. Mr. Carney's been an advisor to the party and an advisor to the Prime Minister for some time. I think we have to work together, face the challenges together. And if there are things that happened in the past, we have to deal with those collectively and move on. I'm not working for a candidate who's running against Mr. Carney or Ms. Gould or anybody else. I'm running with Pam and Sophie here to try to make the Liberal Party better and put it in a position that we're best positioned so that we can beat Pierre Poilievre in the next election.
Right. So Pam Damoff, I know that Karina Gould will announce in Burlington this weekend. I don't know if it's Saturday or Sunday, so if you want to break that news, feel free. But how do you see Karina Gould fitting into this? She seems to be likely to be the only cabinet minister who will run. We're still waiting on Jonathan Wilkinson, though it seems less likely with him. And she represents this younger generational change for the party. How does she fit into this race with the 2 economic candidates front and center in Freeland and Carney?
Well, Karina's and Christian are both cabinet ministers, so there's two cabinet
Well,
ministers.
Freeland was. She's not. She has not been
that's
for a
true.
month. Yeah.
My apology.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, a lot's happened. It's easy to forget.
Yeah, for sure. Look, Karina is someone that I neighbor her riding, right, in Burlington. And so I've worked with her since before we were both elected in 2015. And I see the way that she connects with people, whether it's young people who are just naturally drawn to her because she is younger and she's got that kind of youthful energy, but also seniors and everything in between. And she's someone that is incredibly bright, and I don't think you can discount her economic knowledge or any other kind of knowledge. I think she was underestimated when she ran in 2015 in Burlington, when people said she was too young, that Burlington was too conservative. There's no way that a Liberal could win.
Right.
And she just she just works hard and gets it done.
So I wonder, Ms. Damoff, we've heard carbon tax Carney. We even heard carbon tax Christia come from the opposition leader, Mr. Poilievre. We've not yet heard carbon tax Karina, though I suspect we will hear that once she gets into this race. Where is Karina Gould on the consumer carbon tax? Because the Freeland campaign is leaking out that they're going to scrap it and get rid of it because they recognize that it's not supported. And Mark Carney has made clear he's going to rejig it all, and that is very likely going to be replaced by something else. Where is Karina Gould on this, and do you think consumer carbon pricing survives this leadership race?
So I don't know. I think I shouldn't say that. It's up to Karina to announce her policies. But I do know that the Liberal Party, and whether that's Karina, Christia, or Mark, we believe in climate change, and we believe that we have to take decisive action. So I do know that one of the first things, roundtables I did with Karina was on the environment and on climate change back in 2015. And, whatever policy that she comes forward will be a strong climate policy, because look, it's going to cost us billions of dollars if we don't deal with the effects of climate change. So what the exact policy will be, I'm going to leave that to Karina to announce.
Okay, so Sophie Chatel, how do you think Canadians will respond to this, right? I know Mark Carney was not part of the government, though he was advising the government, and he has been a strong supporter of carbon pricing as a way to deal with climate change throughout the past decade, or if not longer. He's now suggesting a shift. Christian Freeland is suggesting a shift. Do you think Canadians will buy it after you've won 3 elections on it and defended it no matter how unpopular it got?
Yeah, I think what Canadian will feel is a renewed sense of hope on all kind of politics, economic policy, including environmental policy. But I think one thing is very clear for Mark, and I've been speaking with him on the sustainable finance front, is that the economy is transiting towards a green economy. It brings opportunities, it brings challenges, but the one thing I'm certain of is a strong commitment to bring Canada's economy towards a green economy.
Right.
There's different tools to do that. Of course, carbon pricing is one economists have put forward as a great tools. The consumer aspect of the carbon pricing is something that countries adopt. As you know, in Quebec, we don't need the federal carbon pricing. We have our own cap and trade system, and it works, such as California has it. There's also investment into heat pump, for example, for consumers, and electric cars for consumers. So there's a variety of tools, and I think it's smart to say we will take the tools that is good for our time and has the economy grow and has the economy transit.
Okay, but James Maloney, this is a government that stared down premiers, went to court, fought this all the way to the Supreme Court, and imposed the backstop over the objections of key industries and provincial leaders. And now it seems like the party's getting ready to chuck it overboard. I mean, how do you think Canadians will view that if that's where this goes? Because it seems to be the direction of all the frontrunners.
Well, if you characterize it that way, they probably won't look at it very favorably, now will they? But I think the proper way to look at it, David, is if we were to go back to 2015 right now, we'd do it all over again because it was the right thing to do. I don't think Ms. Freeland or Ms. Carney or anybody else, Mr. Carney or anybody else, is going to run away from the past. But fighting climate change it's an evolving process. You have to adapt. The carbon pricing mechanism has been effective. It's worked. It's raised awareness with Canadians. It's help them redirect the way they live their lives. And it's now an opportunity to move on to another phase of fighting climate change. So it's not we're not severing ourselves from the past. We're moving forward and taking the next positive step. It's an evolution. So anybody who tries to characterize it that way, I think is, well, probably you're going to hear Mr. Poilievre try to characterize it that way. So let me just leave it there.
Okay. Pam Damoff, we saw MPs there with Mark Carney. There are suggestions that he has north of 30 members of Parliament endorsing him, and that number is growing. Former Minister Freeland, her campaign suggests the same thing. How does Karina Gould catch up when they seem to have this organizational head start?
Well, I've been telling this story since I first talked to Karina, I guess it was just last week. When I was a little girl, my dad told me the story of the little engine that could. And it always stuck with me all my life, actually. And I would characterize Karina as the little engine. And she may not be the strongest, she may not be the biggest, but she's the most determined, and she's going to take that mountain and she's going to say, I think I can. And you just watch her as she goes over the top and says, I thought I could, because I've seen Karina do it. And I know she can do it, and I know she's going to bring a lot to this contest. And I'm really excited that she's joining the leadership contest.
Sophie Chatel, last question to you. You were involved in the efforts to organize caucus members to get the Prime Minister to reconsider his leadership. As I understand it, you had the letter that everyone signed. Was getting Mark Carney to come in as a replacement part of the plan all along, or was it just the opportunity to have this race?
I think for last summer, we had this discussion with the Prime Minister. I think it was clear for a while that in my riding in particular, but across Canada, Canadians wanted change. They didn't want to go backward, but they want to have change. And so that was conveyed in different format to the Prime Minister. But we are very fortunate right now to have this occasion to have a leader with strong economic background, a focus and a clear vision on how to move forward with the challenges that Canada has. I think what James said earlier was very important. It's no longer time for empty slogan or political game. It's time to be serious. It's time to be united, because what Canadians will face in the next few months, and not only with Trump's and his tariff, but with the challenges of a transition into the green economy, I think it requires so much experience and a focus on the economy, and also unity and all across Canada, across party. Okay. So I think that the political landscape has drastically changed, and it's important to have somebody with that experience.
Okay, we've got to leave it there. I want to thank you all for joining me. I'm sure we'll talk again between now and the 9th of March. Pam Damoff, James Maloney, and Sophie Chatel. Good to see you all. Thank you.
I'm back home in Edmonton to declare my candidacy for Leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada.
Former Bank of Canada and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney officially enters the Liberal leadership race, and he says he is all in. Carney joins a number of candidates already committed to running, while others prepare to mount a bid. Government House Leader Karina Gould is expected to launch her campaign in her Burlington, Ontario riding at some point this weekend. And a source tells us that former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland will announce her bid on Sunday in Toronto. Sources also say that if elected leader, Freeland would drop the carbon tax, a pivot away from one of the Liberal government's signature environmental policies, and a tax that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre still says he wants to fight an election over.
If we had a carbon tax election now, we could elect a strong, stable, national majority government that would stand up for all Canadians, all industries, in all provinces, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, it's time to bring in the power panel. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. And here with me in the studio is Laura D'Angelo, who is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's good to see you all. Laura, I'm going to start with you because unless the rest of the panel surprises us, you're the only one voting in this Liberal leadership. Mark Carney launched today, long-awaited entrance into politics. and said this is a government that lost its focus on the economy, spent too much, invests too little, and he's going to change things. So hello, Liberals. How do you like me? What did you make of his debut?
I mean, I thought it was an interesting launch from a tour perspective. I think using the hockey arena was interesting, some nice signaling there, given he spent time abroad trying to show he's, every Canadian. Clearly trying to distance himself from Justin Trudeau, which I expect we're going to see from all candidates. But he's also the first big name out of the gate right now. And I think while it is a short leadership race, there is a lot still to come. I think Minister Freeland this weekend, we're going to see her try to pivot to being much more retail politics than we've seen her in the past. And assuming Minister Gould also announces this weekend, it's also going to be really interesting. Minister Gould is a very plain speaker. It's something that's said often about Dominic LeBlanc. She connects directly with Canadians, I think, in a way that we haven't seen Mark Carney do, and we certainly haven't seen Christopher Freeland do.
So, James, it's sort of been an interesting, there are kind of 3 acts with Mark Carney this week publicly. The Daily Show, soft launch, don't call it a launch, that he was very comfortable and seemed at ease. The speech was a little bit more halting, though the news conference afterwards, he was back to being comfortable and kind of unscripted, it seemed. So stylistic thing is one thing, but the substance of what he said was he really is all in on the economy and criticizing the party he now wants to lead as having been off on the economy and maybe inappropriate on spending. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I mean, it's a pathway that I can understand why he wants to go down and present himself that way, but it's a pathway that frankly misses credibility. He's a senior economic advisor to the incumbent government. He was he's good friends with Minister Freeland. I believe he's the godfather to one of her children, and she was the finance minister. Justin Trudeau liked him so much that he frankly blew up his government to try to make him his own finance minister. So to say that, he's not like Justin Trudeau, well, Justin Trudeau thinks you're a lot like him because he wanted you to be his finance minister. So, and he has been an advocate for years now, a decade, for the carbon tax that Justin Trudeau brought in. So the ability for him to dissociate himself from the incumbent Liberal government on economics, I think, is not only going to be hard, but I think pretty impossible. Another thing, I'm glad you mentioned Jon Stewart. He went on Jon Stewart and, he had his good moment there. I don't know that he'd have quite the same reception or capacity to be as casual and engaging on Tout le monde en parle in Quebec, because with respect, his French is pretty rough. It's adequate French for bilingualism, and if you want to be considered a bilingual member of parliament as a parliamentary secretary. But the French parts of his prepared speech he had to read, and in the Q&A part, you can tell that he thinks in French. To be considered actually bilingual, you actually think in French, and you can tell in the way in which the language flows out of your mouth. And his adequacy in French, I think, is wanting. That's, I think, a challenge for the Liberal Party, given that they don't have a Francophone candidate or a candidate from Quebec in the race. Yeah,
and Quebec is such a power base for the party. So Andrew, I wonder, though, about this. It's almost like the blue Liberal return is how he's trying to portray it. And I know he's been a central banker and an advisor to the Prime Minister, and everybody on this panel can outline all the connections leading him to the Prime Minister's office. How do you think Canadians will see it? Does that matter to them, or are they just happy to see someone talking about the bread and butter economic issues?
Well, it's a good question as to whether the mood has changed some. I mean, this angry, mentality that we've gone through of this convoy mob stuff, Pierre Poilievre, everybody's as mad as every other Canadian. I think Canadians now are kind of moving a little bit past that and starting to worry a little bit more about what the economy looks like, who actually does have the solutions for it, who does have that steady hand, who is capable of actually leading. Carney's speech today wasn't great. I think we could admit that the political skills just were not on display. But that may not be what Canadians are looking for. I think what they are looking for is who can come forward with those kind of new ideas or the better ideas that are going to help us get over this very tough time. And Donald Trump, like it or not, changed that agenda completely. Now the question is Carney the guy? Is Freeland the person? I don't know. Is Pierre Poilievre able to step up and show he can unite the Conservative Party, let alone the country? Who's got the solutions for this? And I think that's what we're going to see play out over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I don't know this for sure, but it looked to me like something happened with his teleprompter, because I could see him looking for the paper copy, and as someone who's had that happen to them once or twice in their career, I tell you, a moment of panic sets in, and I've never run for anything and had to deal with that. But so, Chatel, I wonder, like Andrew made the point there that some of the political skills are not necessarily there, and this is what people who are supporting Mark Carney say is like they think he's got a processor, upstairs that is perfect for the job. Can they turn him into a politician, by the time he has to be one? But he was making the point that I'm not a politician I'm not a politician as usual because these aren't usual times, kind of offering that as an antidote to where we are. What do you think?
So much to unpack. First of all, did he have a teleprompter?
He did. They were there. Yes.
Did
yes.
he? Okay, yeah. Because the first thing I thought was, why doesn't he have a teleprompter? Because we all noticed him reading the speech. It was like, is it because he's not comfortable? What is going on there? So, hey, Team Carney, let's not have your teleprompter fail next time, because it was not a good look. I won't spend too much more time repeating what's already been said. But, there are two elements to this. Obviously, there's two tracks. There's winning the leadership, and then there's winning the election. And I think the problem or the challenge for Carney today was that we did not hear him or see him taking the fight to Pierre Poilievre as robustly as he could and should have. And I think there were some wasted and missed opportunities there. So it's one thing to talk about how you're not Justin Trudeau or how you've got distance from him, you're not the same person he was. And James has already outlined, all of the ways that Conservatives are going to try to build that link and say, well, he's just like Trudeau. But, for a lot of voters, and for a lot of voters who are not necessarily, extremely fervent one way or the other towards any party, what they're looking for is somebody with a bit of pep, somebody with some energy, and someone willing to throw a punch and say, hey, I am going to be a better leader than Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre is somebody who we think as Liberals speaks in slogans, 3 words at a time, and doesn't have a lot to say on policy. That was what I might have expected to hear from him today. Instead, we heard a lot of the technocratic stuff around the economy. I'm not saying that that's not important, but it just wasn't delivered with a lot of oomph. And so I think we've got to see more of that, because ultimately, when we look at the polling, when we look at the data, the problem for Mark Carney is not about getting wobbly Liberals back on board. They're happy to have somebody to get behind who isn't named Justin Trudeau. It's about bringing enough voters back on board as Liberals to defeat Pierre Poilievre. And that's the problem. That's going to be the challenge for Carney. I didn't see it today, not yet. Okay, well, he did, Laura, go after Pierre Poilievre, slogans, slander, and sound bites and this sort of thing. But he's also, it seems to me he was saying, I'm a serious guy who's done serious things, and that guy is a career politician and not a serious person. Is that an argument you think the Canadian electorate, Liberals will love it? What do you think undecided or disaffected voters will feel about an argument like that from him?
I'm not sure that that's actually going to work, because Pierre Poilievre has tapped into a sentiment right now that is just permeating across Canada and the population. Things are really hard. And Pierre Poilievre is articulating that in a way that resonates with people. I'm not sure going out and telling all of those people he's not serious, the way he's describing your feelings that you are connecting with isn't right, it's not good. That's incredibly disvalidating.
But I guess it's the argument of slogans versus solutions, perhaps, is where it seems to be.
Sure, which I get, but most people vote emotionally, right? Most people, we're emotional beings, and so to disavow that entirely, I think actually might be a bit of a problem.
James, do you get the sense that that's where they want to go with it, Team Carney? That was what I was taking from it in the very brief introduction of his campaign that we saw with policy to follow. And they all seem to think, the Liberals, that Trump and what's happening there is kind of reframing what the election will be about, from the carbon tax election to the Donald Trump and State of the Economy election.
I think that they might try to do that, but the problem is time is not on their side. And you need a very skilled politician with experience in communication in a time of heightened anxiety and with the constancy of social media and the ability to communicate in punchy ways that punch through people's everyday lives, I think is really enormously important. People have said about Mark Carney, and I personally like Mark Carney, and he's been in the public spotlight for a long time, Bank of Canada, Bank of England, his resume we know. But to say that because he's been in the public spotlight in those positions, therefore he can transition over to being a politician because it's also in the public spotlight, that's like saying figure skating and hockey are the same because they both involve skates. It's not the same thing. And his ability to transition not only himself and from, frankly, an elite within the sort of intelligentsia into sort of an everyday plain-spoken guy who can connect with everyday people, and to drag an incumbent government and all of its constituent parts along after 10 years of being in government and to reform the way in which they think and talk about these things, I think is an extraordinarily heavy lift for anybody to do, and particularly somebody who's never run for office before.
So Andrew, on that point, the argument was that the country needs change, but not just any kind of change, and he is a safer, more serious change, was also kind of the subtext there. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, to James's point, though, the flip side is also true, that a lot of people are looking at Pierre Poilievre and going, you've been an attack dog in Parliament for basically all your life, including your brief stint in cabinet as a junior minister. How does that translate through to somebody who can actually lead a G7 economy at a time of crisis? And I think that that's really the question is, will the public look at this and frame this debate differently once Donald Trump is in power? And I think that really what Carney's looking at is not focusing an enemy lens on Poilievre, but really trying to focus us back as, as Canadians, we need to come together, we've got to find the common solutions, and we've got to protect what's ours against the American threat. Right. That's a very different kind of proposition he's putting forward, and it's probably one that Mark Carney's actually able to carry. Whether it's the one that the people look at or not, I don't know. But when you look at where the premiers came out this week, with almost all of them uniting around this kind of sense that this is the single most important issue for Canada to deal with today, it says to me that something's changing in the political discourse, and Carney can probably tap into that.